Okay, everyone, welcome to another episode of the NFL 2020 Team Preview Series. Today, we're still in the AFC North, talking about the Cleveland Browns. Today's episode, let's begin. I don't have any Browns merchandise or jerseys to wear, unfortunately. This is the closest color that might match the Browns' burnt orange. I don't know how it's going to turn up on camera, but at least in person, it kind of reminds me of it. Anyway, I digress. Let's take a look at the Browns' year last year, 2019 recap. They were 6-10 overall, which was pretty disappointing because everybody thought with Freddie Kitchens being promoted to the new head coaching position and what's his name finally being out of town, they replaced the offensive coordinator with Todd Monken. They thought everything was finally coming into position. They had a decent draft, and it was going to be their time to ascend, and they just ran into a boatload of new problems. So the 6-10 overall season last year wasn't the best. It was a very ugly 6-10. Offense finished 22nd in the league. They were 22nd in passing, 12th in rushing. Defense also finished 22nd overall in the league. They were 30th against the pass and 7th against the run. So very strong front seven, at least on the defensive line. But the passing game with Baker Mayfield just didn't click, as you could see, with the 22nd ranking in passing for offense. The second year for Baker Mayfield was pretty disturbing in terms of his numbers, and once teams figured out that his protection was rather subpar, his ability to make magic happen on the open field with Beckham and Landry just never clicked, and they couldn't get it together. So, with all that having been said, your new head coach for the 7th time, and I believe 8 years since Jimmy Haslam took over, wow, is Kevin Stefanski, first year head coach for the Cleveland Browns. He's the former Vikings offensive coordinator. And the thing about Kevin Stefanski that I'm just going to say right off the bat is that he comes from what I would call a land of stability. He's only had 2 other jobs when he worked for Penn and the Minnesota Vikings. And I believe he's been with the Minnesota Vikings since, I want to say, 2003. I could be wrong about that. That sounds wrong. It might have been later. But anyway, I digress. He worked under Brad Childress. He worked with Brett Favre. He's been with one team forever, and he's had one general manager since Rick Spielman was hired in, I believe, 2006. My years could be a little off, give or take one. So he comes from a franchise that is, I don't want to say really well run, but at least run better in a sense that it's not a revolving door at some of the more important positions of the front office and with the coaching staff. So that's going to be an interesting dynamic to see how that plays out. So he could bring some of that culture over to the Cleveland Browns, who desperately need it. Taking a look at the snapshot of the previous 4 years for the Browns, 2018, they were 7-8-1. That's when all the hype began. And then, of course, everybody remembers the previous season, 2017, they went 0-16. 2016, they were 1-15. 2015, they were 3-13. So they've lost 62 games over the last 5 years, if my math is correct, only winning 17 of those contests, and of course tying 1. So we can't go back to this. We just can't. It's just that can't happen again. It's been almost 20 years. Let's see. The team came back in 1999. So yeah, it's been 20 years, and we just have to get this. We have to get this figured out. We have to get this corrected. It's going on for too long, and I want to say that, and I know I sound like a broken record, and I know fans are probably tired of hearing it, but at least in my mind, there is reason for hope this year. And I'm not saying playoffs or title contention or anything like that, but I think that there is reason for hope buried in the details that we have here. Of course, I've already talked about Stefanski being the new head coach, where he comes from what I would like to call a land of stability. That's a plus. Andrew Berry, the new general manager, he's, I believe, the youngest general manager, at least on the books for the NFL currently. And that is interesting just in the aspect that we're going to be taking a look at this team from a different direction. Now, his draft was, the first draft under his belt was pretty good. I was very pleased with this draft haul that they got, starting with Jedrick Wills, who we'll talk about in a minute. There's a few areas concerned on the depth chart, but I think on paper, in terms of personnel and coaching staff, that this team could be sneaky good. And I know I've predicted them to be like, they're going to right the ship this year, 9-7, 8-8. I could see them winning 10. This time, having looked at some of the things on paper, if it translates to the field, this should be pretty good, at least in my mind. Now, I know there's going to be people who are like, whoa, I'm not falling for that anymore. Nope, I'm done trying to figure this team out. I'm not doing predictions yet, but this could be one of my dark horses. I had the Bears a couple years ago. Things just looked like they were going to align. I was like, oh, wow, 49ers last year, they looked pretty good. So let's go over the depth chart, and starting with the defense. Two areas of concern. The secondary, only because of injury and inexperience, and the linebacking position, only because of inexperience. They've had two very good linebackers walk in free agency, Schobert and Kirksey, and they have been replaced with rookie Phillips from LSU, Taki, and Mack Wilson, who was a draft pick 2 years ago from Alabama. I like Mack Wilson, I really do, but he was a 5th-round draft pick who looked like a steal in the preseason, but didn't really translate to the regular season. Getting back to the secondary, Denzel Ward has really, I'm just going to go ahead and say injury concerns. He's missed a couple games due to concussions, and the coverage has been an issue. He's still a really great player if he can figure it out. He could be a dynamic starting corner in this league. On the opposite side, Greedy Williams, maybe he showcased why he fell in the draft 2 years ago, last year. So he has a lot of growing to do. And really with him, the concern was tackling, but really it was more of his coverage last year that was more damning than his tackling was. For safeties, you have Grant Delpit from the LSU squad, who is a very good safety, and I was very surprised to see him fall to the 2nd round. So the Browns get a potential steal in him. And you have Carl Joseph, who comes over in free agency. Andrew Sendejo is also on the roster from the Minnesota Vikings, so be on the lookout for him. Moving to the defensive line, which is the highlight of the defense and is made of nightmares. You have Myles Garrett, who also today, fun fact, I didn't plan it, but they decided to extend him to a 5-year, $125 million contract. So just the luck of the draw that I picked this day to film the Browns episode. So Myles Garrett anchors the defensive end position. You have Sheldon Richardson on the interior, Ogunjobi on the interior, and Olivier Vernon on the interior. The other draft pick that they had this year that I really think is going to be a big-time steal is Jordan Elliott from Missouri, who I desperately wanted the Vikings to pick, but it just didn't work out that way. Moving on to the offense, this is one of the things that I think gives the Browns hope, is the trenches on of this team are very good. At least on paper, it's very good. If Myles Garrett doesn't get suspended for any sort of shenanigans this year on the field, which I don't think he will, I think that was a one-off time fluke. This team in the trenches looks great. Starting with the rookie from their 1st-round pick this year, Jedrick Wills. Alabama's going to take over at left tackle for the just deplorable Greg Robinson. Bitonio is one of the better guards in the league. J.C. Treader is one of the better centers in the league. You've got Teller coming in to hopefully fix the right guard position. And then Conklin, they signed from Tennessee in the offseason, who had a great season with the Titans last year to really solidify and fix this tackle problem that they had. The offensive line was one of the biggest headaches last year. On paper, I think this looked great. And I just hope that it pans out, because this could give Baker Mayfield tons of protection and really help to install the zone scheme offense that Kevin Stefanski is going to run. Speaking of which, you'll be seeing a lot of more 2 tight end sets with Kevin Stefanski, which is what we had last year in Minnesota with Kyle Rudolph and Irv Smith Jr. from Alabama. So they went out in free agency and signed Austin Hooper from the Falcons, made him the most expensive tight end in the league. I could be wrong about that. And they also have David Njoku right now, but he has recently demanded a trade, so I don't have him listed as a potential starter. I'm just going to assume that trades happen. So looking at the depth chart, they have Carlson, or they could go with Harrison Bryant, the rookie that they got this year from Florida Atlantic. I'm going with Bryant. I think he may be a little bit more dynamic and be able to do what Stefanski wants. That's just my guess. I could be totally wrong. Maybe Carlson will be the guy, but ultimately you want Njoku to be in there, so hopefully they can keep him. Baker Mayfield is your returning starting quarterback for the 3rd year. A lot of improvement needs to be made in his department for his 3rd season. Wide receivers Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham Jr. They drafted Donovan Peoples-Jones from Michigan late in the draft this year. It's just going to be a mystery to find out who becomes wide receiver number 3. But if they're going to run a lot of 2 tight end sets, which I do anticipate, maybe that's not a problem after all. And then in the backfield, you have Nick Chubb, who was this close to being the rushing champion last year with over 14,000 yards on 298 carries. They do need to figure out a way to get him maybe just a few carries less, because that is a lot of tread on the tires. Yes, he's not 25 yet. He's a very dynamic, slippery, break tackle style runner, but it's still at the same time, I don't want to see him worn down, where if they were to get into the playoffs, where he would be ineffective. So getting Kareem Hunt more involved, getting Hilliard more involved, I believe he's still on the roster. That should be accurate. Should be something that they do look to do more of going forward. And you saw that, I think we saw that a lot last year with Alexander Mattison, spelling Dalvin Cook more often than not. So that is the projected depth chart. I think I think it could be fantastic. I think we could be looking at a serious potential dark horse, because on paper this should work. Taking a look at this year's schedule for 2020, starting off with the Ravens on the road, then we have the Bengals and Washington at home, Cowboys on the road, Colts come to town, then back-to-back road games against the Steelers and the Bengals, and then you round out the first half of the season at home against the Raiders. So not much to talk about for the first half of the season, other than getting that Ravens away game out of the way immediately, which it could be a lot beneficial. It's going to be weird depending on the number of fans in the stands this year. Maybe home games aren't as beneficial as before, but at the same time, getting that out of the way immediately is better than having to do it in December, at least in my opinion. At week 8, this is where the interesting portion of the Browns schedule comes in that I think could benefit them greatly. You take a look at week 8, you got a home game. You take a look at week 10, Texans at home, Eagles at home for week 11. 9 is the bye week, so you have a month straight where you're staying at home in Cleveland, Ohio. So that could be very beneficial to this team to gear up for a second half run. Of course, you go on the road back-to-back weeks with the Jaguars in week 12, the Titans in week 13. The Jaguars should be a winnable game, depending on how well they believe Gardner Minshew can do this year. You got the home game, and this is the other nice part. The home game against the Ravens is on the 14th week. Then you've got the Giants and Jets on the road. I don't believe that they'll be competitive this year. And then you get the Steelers as your final home game. So your final 2 home games are against your division rivals, and your final 2 away games are against teams that you probably should beat. So this, I think the schedule, between how talented they are on the offensive line and how talented the defensive line is, this team should win 10 games. It should. I mean, on paper, it looks like it should. A lot of it's going to depend on Baker Mayfield. A lot of it's going to depend on how well Kevin Stefanski can win over this locker room. A lot of it's going to depend on... I can't talk. A lot of it's going to depend on the defense. We have Woods coming in to take over the defensive coordinator duties. Stefanski doesn't have Mike Zimmer anymore, the genius behind that defense in Minnesota. But Woods has, some experience, and he's worked under guys like Wade Phillips. So there's hope there as well. So there's a lot of things that if they fall into the right spots, this team can be good, and the schedule is what I would think to be favorable, at least. The 3 big storylines we're looking out for, I've already mentioned all of them, except for the last one. Jordan Elliott, I want to see how they utilize him this year. David Njoku, how much longer is he still going to be on this team? And the passing defense, that was a problem last year. As you look, they were 30th against the pass. That is not good enough to win 10 games. That's why this team was an ugly 6-10 last year. So in my mind, if they can fix the passing defense where it is good enough to be on the same level of caliber with the defensive line that is going to be an absolute terror for opposing quarterbacks this year, this defense could improve to be better than 22nd overall in the league. So really, from the aspect of offense and defense, they have to get better in both categories in terms of passing, defense and offense. So that's going to do it. I'm pretty optimistic about the Browns, and I probably shouldn't be, but here we are. Thank you guys very much for watching. Have a good one.